Hey everybody, I hope you're enjoying your snow day at home. Today we're going to start on Module 10, which is going to cover the kingdoms of Protista and fungi. Remember we had 3 domains, archaea and bacteria we covered in Module 9, and so from here out we're going to be talking about the domain Eukarya. Okay, remember domain Eukarya is broken down into 4 kingdoms. Okay, these are the 4 kingdoms: Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. All right, these are the 4 kingdoms of Eukarya. So today we'll talk about Protista, and next week we'll talk about kingdom fungi, and that'll be module 10. All right, so kingdom Protista, these are basically animal or plant-like or fungi-like organisms that live in the water typically. They're kind of grouped in this category because they don't fit exactly in any other kingdom, so we put them in kingdom Protista. But they do have some things in common. They are all eukaryotic cells, like we just mentioned. Remember, that just simply means that they have a cell membrane with cytoplasm, but the DNA is in a nucleus, and then they have additional organelles that perform functions in the cell. Some of them even have chloroplasts because they're photosynthetic. In the plant-like protist, you'll find photosynthetic organisms. All right, they can be unicellular, which means they're made of one cell, right? They can be colonial, which are single-celled protist that kind of group together to function as one but still unique individual cells, or they can be multicellular. Okay, and this just simply means one organism made of more than one cell, right? So protists typically live in watery environments, so watery or aquatic environments, and they typically reproduce asexually. Remember, this just means there's one parent giving genetic information instead of 2, but some can reproduce sexually through the process of conjugation, where they are able to exchange genetic information, but most reproduce asexually. There's about 200,000 species of protist. It is a very diverse kingdom, kind of like a catch-all kingdom. Like I said, these are organisms that don't particularly fit in fungi or plant or animal, but they do have some things in common, so they're grouped together under the kingdom of Protista. Okay, so a couple of terms that we need to define. This word plankton is this blank here, kind of in the middle of your notes. Plankton. This is a term that's referring to tiny organisms that float in the water. So tiny organisms that float. If it is an animal-like organism, we call it zooplankton. And if it is a plant-like organism, we call it phytoplankton. Okay, zoo meaning animal-like, phyto meaning plant-like. So we have animal and plant-like tiny organisms. All right, so phytoplankton is where you're going to find most of the algae, along with a few other organisms. Okay, so when we classify protists, we are going to first group them based on their means of nutrition. So we have we have protists that are animal-like, so they're heterotrophs, which means they consume to get their nutrition. We have plant-like protists, which means that they are autotrophs, and so they can make their own nutrition. Or we have ones that are fungi-like, which means that they get their nutrition from decaying matter, so they're basically decomposers or saprophytes who absorb their nutrition from things that have passed. So we're going to group them based on nutrition first. Okay, under the animal-like protist, we are going to additionally group them by how they move. So Animal-like protist, we often use this term, protozoan. Okay, a protozoan is just another word for animal-like protist. Okay, and we're going to group protozoans based on how they move. Okay, based on how they move. So that's the other blank in the parentheses there. All right, so the first type of protist that we're going to talk about, you may have heard of. We're going to, it's phylum Sarcodina, and these are the amoebas. Okay, example is amoeba, right? Phylum Sarcodina, example amoeba. All right, so the thing about amoeba, and I'll show you a picture here in a minute, is they move by something called a pseudopod. And a pseudopod is simply, it kind of like, it's, I spelled that wrong. It's got an O in here, pseudopod, like that. There we go, pseudopod. Okay, pseudo, this part of the word means false, and this part of the word means foot, so they move by something called a false foot. And the reason it's called a false foot is because the shape of the amoeba changes, and so this is not a permanent structure. It's something that they create when they want to move. So if you're looking at a picture of an amoeba, you'll see that it's kind of got this really strange shape, but is able to push cytoplasm out into a structure that forms something like a foot, and then when it doesn't need that anymore, it can draw it back in, so that the amoeba then is constantly changing shape. Okay, so that's why it's called a false foot. These little projections here that you see are pseudopods that have been created. Still has a cytoplasm, still has a nucleus, okay, where the DNA is contained, but it does have the ability to make that false foot. It also creates food vacuoles in a similar way. Okay, remember that a vacuole is simply a place of storage in the cell. Okay, so it's able to create this food vacuole here where it projects out a false foot. It can surround a piece of food. Okay, and then eventually these false feet are going to pretty much connect and enclose this little piece of food. And it will digest the food in this vacuole that it's created and be able to store it there as well. Okay, that's how it engulfs its food. It also has a contractile vacuole, which is a vacuole that is able to contract. And this, because it lives in a watery environment, this is a way for it to be able to get rid of excess water, so it can contract or squeeze water out of the cell, so it doesn't take on too much water. Okay, and the other thing about this group is that they do have the ability to form cyst, which is kind of a protective mechanism for the amoeba. It allows it to live in adverse conditions or kind of go to sleep or be dormant for a while until conditions are favorable, and then it can begin to grow and reproduce. So it's amoeba that cause a really bad form of dysentery, amoebic dysentery. If you ingest amoeba and they get into your gut, they can cause amoebic dysentery, which is a very serious form of diarrhea, hard to get rid of, and can lead to dehydration very quickly. All right, so this is the amoebas. All right, the second group that we're going to talk about is the phylum Zoomastigophora. Okay. All right, Zoomastigophora. So these are going to be zooflagellates, and a flagellate is, or a flagella is a tail-like structure that's found on these organisms. So these move by a means of flagella. All right. So amoebas move by a false foot. These move by a little tail, a whip-like tail that's attached to its body. Okay. And so these are different from the bacteria flagella that we talked about, remember those spin like an outboard motor, but this flagella has more of a whip-like action. They absorb their food through a process called phagocytosis, which again enables them to take food right through the cell membrane, okay? And these can also be parasitic, meaning that they live in a host, okay? Just like amoeba can live in a host. They don't have to, but these can be parasitic and live in a host as well. African sleeping sickness is a disease that's caused by a form of a zooflagellate and called trypanosoma, which is also a very serious disease, and you can kind of see a picture of it there. All right. So moving through these pretty quickly, let's keep going. If you turn to the back, up to the next page, the second page here, looks like this, and starts with phylum Coeliophora. Okay, Coeliophora are protists that move by means of what we call cilia. Okay, and cilia are just little hair-like structures found along the outside of the cell. Okay, the example of this is paramecium. You can sort of see that to the side. I'll show you a little bit bigger picture of paramecium with the cilia, the hair-like structures all around the outside. You can see that it still has cytoplasm, has two different types of nucleus. Okay, the first one is the macronucleus. This is macro means larger, so this is the larger of the two. And it's the macronucleus that is used to control metabolism in the cell, but they also have a micronucleus. So this is a little bit smaller nucleus, and this one is used more to control reproduction. Okay, these organisms also have a contractile vacuole. You'll see that up here, contractile vacuole. Okay, again, that's used to get rid of excess water that's in the cell. In their nutrition, they do have something called an oral groove. The oral groove is a place that where the food is actually swept into the body. Okay, so here is the oral groove. All right, this little area here is the oral groove, and the food is swept into the body. There, where it goes into a gullet, which is kind of like a throat stomach. Okay, from there it goes into the gullet through an opening called an oral groove. I'm sorry, an oral pore. Okay, so and then the waste that is left over after digestion is going to exit through an anal pore. Okay, a pore is just an opening. Okay, so it has an oral groove where food enters through the oral pore into the gullet, and then the waste exits out of the anal pore. Okay, so out of these three organisms that we've talked about that are animal-like so far, we have the amoeba that moves by a false foot, right? And then we had the zooflagellates that move by a whip-like tail. We have paramecium that move by hair-like structures on the body. And then the last group of animal-like protists are the sporozoa. Okay, sporozoa. These don't move. Okay, so Plasmodium is an example of sporozoa. They do not move, so we say they're non-modal. There's about 30,000 parasitic species that live and feed and host. Okay, malaria, the species that causes malaria, is an example of a sporozoan. And the thing that separates them from some of the others is that they have the ability to produce spores. Okay, a spore is a reproductive cell that has a protective coat around it, and again, that protective coat is going to enable it to live in adverse conditions, so that it can lay dormant until conditions are right for it to become active. Okay, so that's the four different groups of animal-like protists. Okay, so now let's move on to the ones that are fungus-like. Okay, the fungus-like protists are groups here. They're not quite fungi, and we'll talk about fungi next week, but they are like fungi because they are decomposers. So we're going to talk about two groups. Slime molds and then water molds and mildews are grouped together. So slime molds live in damp, nutrient-rich environment of decaying organic matter. Okay, so slime molds feed on decaying organic, that's that blank there, matter. Okay, they produce by something called a fruiting body. Okay, so the fruiting body is what makes it, besides being a decomposer, it's that fruiting body that also makes it fungus-like, because we'll learn that fungi reproduce, most of them with a fruiting body. Okay, and so you have two different types of slime molds. You have cellular slime molds and acellular slime molds. Okay, cellular and acellular slime molds. So the cellular slime molds are going to live as individual distinct cells, but they can come together and form a colony if food is in short supply, and it just makes them more efficient to live in a group. Okay, if food is in short supply, so they can live cellularly but as a colony, right? Single cell, individual cells, but as a colony. But they can also be acellular. Okay, and if they're acellular, they can be kind of like an amoeba type cell, but they can fuse together to make one large cell that has multiple nuclei in it. Okay, and so these are you might see these in the woods or out in nature, especially in an area that stays moist or damp all the time. But a couple of different types of slime molds. On these, you can really see these little fruiting bodies. Okay, they're kind of on a little stalk with a little fruit on the end. Okay, that's like the fruiting bodies. This is more of an acellular type slime mold, more amoeba-like and all fused together. Okay. So those are examples of slime molds. We also have water molds and mildews. So these decompose dead plants and animals in freshwater environments. Some are parasitic. If your fish ever gets slimy looking, it could be a water mold that's growing on your fish. It can grow on their skin or on their gills. They can fuse together with filaments called hyphae. Okay, and this is another structure that we find in fungi, and you'll see when we talk about that next week that the hyphae are very important to fungi. Okay, but it's thin filaments, so think of just a thin strands. Okay, they can fuse together by thin strands, and mildews are an example of a water mold that grows on land. Okay, and so not in a watery environment, but it grows on land, and it can affect plants or infect plants. Okay, so that's all we're going to talk about, the fungus-like protist. It's not a large group. Okay, again, but they fit better under the kingdom Protista than they do under the kingdom fungi, even though they have share some similarities with the kingdom fungi. All right, so the last thing that we're going to talk about today, this is a pretty large group, and so we're going to be going through quite a few different phylum found in this group, but these are the plant-like. Okay, all of the plant-like protist, the autotrophs. Okay, that's what makes them plant-like. So one thing that you that might be interesting to know is that most of the world's oxygen is produced by phytoplankton. Okay, so most of the world's oxygen is made by these tiny little floating plant-like organisms known as phytoplankton. Okay, so when we are classifying algae, which are found in this group of protists, we're going to basically classify them based on their cell wall, their structure, and the pigments that we find in them that help them to be photosynthetic. Okay, the first organism we're going to talk about is the Euglena, and this is found in the phylum Euglenophyta. Okay, so Euglenophyta, it's a little organism that looks like this. Okay, it looks more animal-like than it does plant-like, but because it's photosynthetic, it's been included in with the plant-like organisms because it is it's photosynthetic, so it's kind of autotrophic. Okay, and so we have Euglena. The main pigment that we find in Euglena is chlorophyll. Okay, just like we find in plants. It has an outer covering that protects it called a pellicle. Okay, so a little bit tougher coating that helps it to maintain its shape. Okay, and it also has a structure. This is a sensory structure called an eye spot. Okay, typically when you see the eye spot on Euglena, it's going to kind of have a red light color to it there. It is also called a stigma. In some books you'll see it called a stigma. The purpose of the eye spot, it doesn't see like a human eye. It's just able to detect light, and that's important. If the Euglena is photosynthetic, it's important that it's able to detect light. And so by detecting light, then it's able to move itself towards the light, and it does that with a flagella. It can have one or two flagella, okay? And the other thing is that these are saprophytic, which means they have they can absorb food. Okay, so looking at the picture of Euglena, we have the eye spot here. It has a contractile vacuole for getting rid of excess water. It has mitochondria, nucleus, endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, and chloroplast here because it is photosynthetic. It also has chloroplast, right? And so this little organ here is just a photoreceptor. Again, photo means light, so that's helping this organism to get to a light source again. All right, so that is the first phylum that we'll cover on plant-like protists. Let's move to the next one. This is our last page of notes here, right? Starting with Pyrophyta at the top. Okay, so Pyrophyta. These are the dinoflagellates. They are kind of a flame-colored protist, right? But they do have the green pigment chlorophyll. Okay, so they have the green pigment chlorophyll, but then they have a red-brown pigment called peridinin. Okay, peridinin. There you go. They can have two flagella. One will actually encircle the cell, and the other one is more like a tail. Okay, they are responsible. This is the group of organisms. Sorry, I shouldn't have erased that, but they are responsible for red tide. Okay, which is an algae bloom that is found in the ocean sometimes that infects marine life and kills it. This is something that you would want to avoid as well. If you like seafood, you would not want to eat seafood that has been infected with red tide because it can make you sick as well. The other thing in this section is that they can be luminescent. okay, which basically means that they can glow in the water. Okay, so they have the pigment luciferin that can make them glow in water and give them a luminescent appearance. Okay, so that's Pyrophyta. Then we also have the phylum Chrysophyta. Okay, phylum Chrysophyta are the golden algae. So diatoms are an example of this type of. Let me see if I can show you a picture of this type of protist. Okay, this is the the greatest producer of oxygen. There's more than 1,000 species of Chrysophyta. Okay, they contain the pigment chlorophyll. Okay, which is important for photosynthesis, but they also contain some yellowish pigments called carotenoids. Okay, that can give them that yellowish color, right? Their cell walls are made of silicon dioxide, which is a component of glass, so it can give them a glass-like appearance, right? And interestingly, they store their food in drops of oil in their body, okay? And so this is an example of some diatoms here on the bottom. See, they can have very beautiful shapes. If you're looking at them under a microscope, they kind of have a glass-like appearance because their cell walls are made of silicon dioxide. So it is the diatoms that give us the product diatomaceous earth, or you might know it as fossil flower or diatomite. But when these organisms die, and they can be deposited in the bottom of the ocean, and then they can be mined, so to speak, or this product can be gathered from the bottom of the ocean and then crushed to form this powder that's actually beneficial for a variety of uses. Some people will use them to put on their pets. Some people will even take it internally because they're made of their cell walls are made of silicon dioxide. And when you crush it, the particles are sharp, like little bitty tiny pieces of glass, and so they are good for killing parasites and insects. The glass powder actually, as it gets on the exoskeleton of an insect, it can cause little lacerations in the exoskeleton, which make the organism lose water and they dehydrate. So a lot of people will use diatomaceous earth as a safe pesticide for their livestock or their domestic animals, and again, it's safe enough for people to even take internally. So that's just a little side note about diatoms. Okay, and so then we also have the phylum Chlorophyta, and as you would guess, it does contain the pigment chlorophyll, the green pigment chlorophyll. Okay, but it also has those carotenoids that can give it a yellowish appearance, right? These are the green algae, though. This is where you're going to find most of the green algae is in this phylum Chlorophyta. So they have chlorophyll and they have carotenoids. There's about 7,000 species found in freshwater and saltwater, including the seaweeds. So one example is Spirogyra, which, let's see, Spirogyra kind of looks like this under a microscope. You see that it has these spiral-shaped chloroplast. So the Spirogyra has spiral chloroplast. Okay. And they can form chain-like colonies, so link together to form chain-like colonies. All right, and then Volvox is another one. I don't have a picture of Volvox here to show you, but when you look at images of protists, there's one for your lab, you'll see that there's a Volvox included in those images. So Volvox also has the ability to form colonies because they hook together and create kind of a lattice work of cytoplasm, and so it's a very beautiful structure that they form. And again, you can see an image of that I included in the lab images. Okay, the next one is Rhodophyta. Okay, phylum Rhodophyta. These are the red algae because they contain this red pigment called phycoerythrin. Let's see, make sure I'm getting this right. Phycoerythrin. Okay, phycoerythrin. They can, so it has the red pigment, phycoerythrin, but it's red because it actually absorbs green and blue light. Okay, and so it's the red that's reflected. The red algae are going to live in the deepest of the ocean waters, and an example of this is something called coral reed. Okay, so if we look at here's a picture of just a red algae here. Okay, it has a reddish tint that's going to be found in the deeper ocean water. And then the last type of algae is the Phaeophyta, Phaeo. Okay, and Phaeophyta are the brown algae like this. Okay, brown algae. They contain a pigment called fucoxanthin. Okay, so they also have chlorophyll, but fucoxanthin is what gives them this brown appearance. What's beneficial about Phaeophyta is that the cell walls contain a substance called algin, and algin is used in the food industry as a thickener and also an additive to food. So I think the Asian cultures use algin quite a bit to thicken their food. So it's quite safe and beneficial. There's about 1,500 species of this phylum found in the cold ocean waters. So it's going to be deeper ocean waters, not shallow waters that are warm and get a lot of sunlight. But kelp is an example of this brown algae. Okay, so we're right at about 30 minutes, and we've covered everything for the Kingdom Protista. When you are studying for your quiz next week, you are going to focus your studies on these different phylum names that we've gone over today. So all of these different phylums for the types of plant-like. See the phylum here for the plant-like protist. The fungus-like protist is just slime molds and water molds, okay? And then we have phylum Sporozoa, Ciliophora, Zoomasticophora, and Sarcodina. Okay, so what your quiz is going to be matching, but you would need to be able to match each of these phylum names with a little description. And so we'll kind of cover that on the quiz, and that won't be on your test for Module 10 because we're going to cover that on the quiz. But so focus your study on that. Just pick out keywords from those phylums so that you can match them for the quiz. Okay? If you have any questions, you can shoot me an email. I'll update your information for assignments on the Homeschool Life homepage for biology, and like I say, if you have questions, just send me an email. Sorry we couldn't do it in person today. Didn't have the opportunity to look at some of these things under the microscope, but you have those images to be able to look at to finish your lab. Okay, so have a good weekend, and I'll see you next Thursday. Bye.